and welcome to this episode of the Cold Start Corner Experts Edition. I'm your host, Eric Matei, joined today by Dr. Ron Krefman. And Dr. Krefman is the founder and principal of Focal Center Market Research, industry-leading market research across all aspects of eye care. And as it were, really excited to have Dr. Krefman here for this topic today, all about geospatial analysis and market research for the modern optometry cold start. Dr. Krefman, hello. Welcome to the Cold Start Corner.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And I know we've got a whole lot of things to jump into because this is such a fascinating topic, right? Because let's face it, selecting that location is such an important decision for a doctor cold starting a practice, as well as for doctors perhaps relocating their practice. So really excited to jump into like a deep dive into a lot of these areas that I think it's important for doctors to understand. So why don't we start by why don't you just share with everyone out there, let's just start with defining geospatial analysis and why it's important for optometry cold starts.
So it sounds like it's a NASA invented terminology, but it's really all about what's in your neighborhood, what's nearby you. And what do the consumer profiles look like nearby? What does the competition look like? What's the demand for eye care? And what's the best approach to optimizing an existing practice or finding a new location? And there's a lot of aspects to it.
Yeah, and go ahead.
I was going to say, in a nutshell, it's really pulling together a lot of different data sources around the people and places, and exposing that to the folks in the industry. Typically, independent practices haven't had this kind of resource. Large chains might avail themselves to a third-party provider that does analytics for the real estate industry, for leasing agents and so on, to understand profiles of communities and so on. But they usually don't dig down into eye care specific tangibles. And that's what we do.
Yeah. And touching on what you said a moment ago, what I think is so fascinating, the digital age we now live in is that some of these elements, some of these data sets, some of this research that was previously only available to those with deep pockets, right? Now we're living in this age where there's so much data available that it is accessible to the masses. And that's something obviously that you've done that I think is very fascinating in creating your platform and such. But as we're kind of walking through that, you referenced a moment ago regarding kind of all the different key variables that play into that geospatial analysis. And I know there's a lot of them. So why don't you maybe touch on, when we're talking about looking in these specific areas to better understand that community and that demand, why don't you touch on some of those key variables that modern optometrists should be looking for when they're doing their geospatial analysis?
Well, we have a typical report that we put together that consists of 8 pages of all those variables. And on each page, there's a half dozen or so metrics to measure the area and look at the differences area to area. We usually drill down to a zip code and compare that zip code to nearby zip codes. We also analyze it by drive time from a given address location. But within those drive time areas or zip codes, we're looking at what's the competition look like, how many are there. We actually name and geolocate all the competitors nearby. So we understand the demand and the density of providers in the area. We look at the population statistics in lots of different ways in terms of age and generational looks on things. We look at the households, the number of people per household, the density of the overall population. We look at financial metrics like the home value, the net worth, the median income. We look at employment statistics, like what sort of occupations, what's the unemployment rate. And all those things paint a picture of the local neighborhood. And again, we can drill down and compare area to area, adjacent areas, nearby areas, a little bit further out. Typically, we look at perhaps 9 different zip codes plus the 30-minute drive time radius. So it's a lot of data to pour over and look at, and you can narrow down and sort and arrange it by where's the highest income, where's the least managed vision care, or where's the most managed vision care. So there's lots of variables that are eye care specific, but also many about population and the community.
It's really fascinating to build on what you're saying there, Dr. Krefman. And for our viewers out there, so Akrinos, we use Dr. Krefman's platform. We are huge fans of the localized geospatial analysis. And
Thank you.
what's fascinating is, Dr. Krefman, it comes to mind some of these clients we've worked with where digging into that geospatial analysis further, we're able to better locate based on what that doctor's vision for their practice is. And I think it's such a fascinating time we're living in right now, where we've got this proliferation of the scope of care of optometry, right? Sure, we've got primary care, routine comprehensive, we've got medical, we've got now all of these radical specialties. And I know you're mentioning prior to us hitting record here, some new breakthroughs you're doing with the myopia specialty, right? And
right.
Pediatric opportunities and stuff. But it really is fascinating to consider that, now we're living in a time where doctors can have their vision and then find that best location that suits their vision, rather than the other way around, where it's like, find what's available, then figure out how I'm going to make a business work there. It's really fascinating. So
yeah, it's a good point. There's a couple things I want to add on to that stimulate a couple thoughts. I'll tell you two stories about instances where localized was came up with some surprises for people. One where a doc had 2 or 3 locations in a major metropolitan area that were actually overlapping and cannibalizing from each other. They were a little bit too close together. Now, certainly the intense density of the major metropolitan area allowed for some overlap, but advising that client, I think they ended up closing one of the 3 offices. The other interesting observation I had in delivering a localized report, or someone inquiring about it, was they had actually on their website a list of zip codes served by them. And they missed out on a couple of key zip codes that were perhaps over the river, or, they thought, okay, I'm not going to draw from that area. I won't list that. There were some of the best areas they should have been marketing to that They were missing the opportunity there. So it's just, how it's used. It's used in lots of different ways for finding a location, for understanding the relationship between your locations, and ultimately for optimizing an existing location.
Yeah. So, and to build on that, let's touch on some of these areas. So we figure, okay, so piece number one, I suppose value of number one of that geospatial analysis is just in, on the surface, we think, hey, let's just kind of comb these demographics, socioeconomics, understand competition a little bit. But it's really fascinating when you start to dig deeper and realize how the analysis can inform optimization across the patient journey, perhaps even as it pertains to like operations and stuff like that. Why don't you elaborate on some of these other ways that you're finding geospatial analysis, and particularly, perhaps, Dr. Krefman, you can comment on the tapestries, those patient segments, which I've always found is very fascinating, how deep you can drill down to really understand that patient avatar. So why don't you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, we all like to think of profiles of patients and characterizations, and this goes into a deep dive. There's we look at what are the primary segments nearby for each zip code, and it can change by zip code. And with that, we give you the top 3 segments. There's detailed, I think it's about 3 or 4 pages full of information just about the profile and what their habits are for shopping, what their typical, are they soccer moms, is, perhaps a generalization, but it goes deep into what their buying habits are and their patterns and so on. And specific to eye care, we go into some details around which segment has the highest demand for eye care services and the most willingness to spend.
Yeah.
So in regards to the patient journey and optimization within the practice, you mentioned those things. So really, for an existing practice to optimize based on what they learned from localized, it's really looking at, is the data in my EHR software from my patient profiles a match for my community, or am I sort of biased compared to what's out there in the general population? Am I a good match here? And if I'm not a good match, why is that? Maybe, I'm not offering the right products or services. Maybe I'm not in step with the managed care offered in the community. So all those things can be revealed by a detailed analysis of not only what's nearby, but what's in your system. So it's kind of a double comparison.
Yeah. And it's really interesting also to put it in context of, the old adage, if you build it, they will come. And, now living in a time where we do have access to so much data and we can glean so many insights from it, rather than building it and hoping they will come, instead, let's build something that they want. And I think that's really a key piece. And whether we're talking about product offerings, scope of care offerings, and again, Dr. Krefman, I can't help but right now just think of all of the practices that we have collaborated in serving in optimizing that location, and then the scope of care and the marketing and everything surrounding that. So, so let's talk a little bit about, so we're touching on geospatial analysis with cold starts. We're also touching on geospatial analysis with established practices. Now, obviously, the sky is the limit as it pertains to how much stuff to kind of go digging through. For folks that kind of want to figure this out, like, where do they start? So like, hey, I'm a doctor. Maybe I'm cold starting a practice. Maybe I'm looking to just take my practice to the next level. Geospatial analysis sounds like something that would be valuable to me. Kind of walk through where folks would start with that. How do they access information? Walk through some of that do-it-yourself type stuff.
Yeah. So the Census Bureau actually has a nice little thing where you could put in a zip code and learn some of the demographics nearby that zip code. It gets harder to compare zip code over zip code over zip code. And we do that 9 times over in localized report. You won't get into eye care metrics or variables in the census data. It's more generalized around the population and demographics. And it's not so much about purchasing demand for any products or services, let alone eye care. Some of those things, you could look at Bureau of Labor Statistics data, or the Fed Reserve has data on that, but you need to really sometimes be a data scientist to dig into that and get to that little nugget that might be meaningful to you. But more than likely, it's going to take a huge effort, and it would be frustrating to do. So we try to lay it all out in a very simple infographic format where we tell you right off, what's happening nearby in all the appropriate zip codes, and lay it out with eye care detail.
Yeah, it's very similar to patient care and diagnostics, right? Like we got to have good data. Without good data, you can't take care of a patient.
That's right.
Without good data, you can't really see to it you're optimizing that location, and realizing also, and I think something else is important for viewers to take away from this conversation is that geospatial analysis may be used to select a location, but also that geospatial analysis is used just as much once the practice is operating to keep a finger on the pulse of that local community to give them what they want, right? So it's just as much like, fine, hey, where are we going to plant this practice for the next 10 years as it is, okay, now that we're here, let's really understand this community so we can provide the scope of care, the products, the services, the pricing, the bundling, all that merchandising type stuff, which again, geospatial analysis informs just as much that as it does where we're going to set up the physical location. So
for sure, that the optimizing the practice through changing the assortment in frames, whether it's gender based, price based, whether it's driven by more managed care in the area, whether there's some practices that specialize in Medicaid, and whether they're looking for low income areas, and inform yourself with all of these details, and it will lead to reviewing are we offering the right products and services in this office, and expansion opportunities certainly for all sorts of specialty care. Myopia has been a big focus on what we've done with a new version of localized for myopia, but looking at opportunities for primary care as well. We have some metrics around the rate of diabetes in the area and hypertension, around aesthetics, people spending extra on spa services or facial treatments, that sort of thing. It gives you a good indicator. Some of them are proxies, but it gives you a good indicator for what's the opportunity going to be for the specialty area I want to move into.
Love it. Incredible stuff. And it once again, it all ties back to data and having access to the right data to make strategic decisions for the modern practice. Dr. Krefman, this has been really great. One comment before we jump into, because I'm looking forward to you to kind of give us a deep dive of localized, and also tell us the story how you got into this as well. But before that, something you mentioned a moment ago regarding product mix. So viewers, if you want to learn more about that, Dr. Krefman is a regular contributor to GPN Visions. So go ahead and find it, gatewaypn.com. Go check out some of Dr. Krefman's writings about product mix and leveraging analysis to optimize that product mix. So Dr. Krefman, this has been a really great conversation. A lot of great insights you've been sharing. Why don't you share a little bit about your background and how you got into doing this amazing stuff you're doing at Focal Center?
Well, I've been an optometrist forever. I went to ICO, graduated in '78. And my first position was in an academic setting at an eye hospital in Chicago. And it led me into research and always working with data. And I was principal investigator for some studies of new products. I've been a consultant for various companies and always working with data. And I focused on it over the last 12 years or so exclusively with Focal Center. It's a consultancy that we do data analytics specific to the eye care industry, and we have lots of different opportunities to work with different clients on various projects, and including some products that we've launched like Localize, where it gives independent optometrists tools to help better themselves.
And really incredible stuff. And again, Dr. Krefman, I can say firsthand, working very closely with your Localized tool, using it all the time with clients in all sorts of situations. It really is. It is so powerful, the insights that provides. And also realizing that is the starting point. And that I think also is what's very fascinating about this, is that's the starting point. From there, what you're going to do with it, the insights and the strategy moving forward, well, that's other conversations.
You're absolutely right, Eric. So that is not my expertise necessarily to implement and coach on the data, but that's where I love working with experts like you to take the information learned from a Localized report to the next level and help the practice grow and reach their goals or set new goals. And it's the best extension of all the information we learned from this robust reporting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Dr. Krefman, again, man, thank you so much for joining here. For what's been a really great conversation. Geospatial analysis and market research for the modern optometry cold start. For our viewers out there, if you wanted to connect with Dr. Krefman, continue the conversation, or if you want to look into the Localized report for your practice, you can connect with them over at focalcenter.com. Everything you'll need to know. And I think also, Dr. Krefman, folks can contact you directly through Focal Center.
Yes. There's an email link there. Yep.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Krefman, again, thank you so much for hanging out here at the Cold Start Corner. For our viewers out there, we hope you found this valuable. If you're looking for more great practice management tips, subscribe to the Akrinos YouTube channel, follow us on the socials, and find more great Cold Start content over there at the Cold Start Corner at Akrinos.com. And on behalf of our team at Akrinos, signing off, Dr. Krefman, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric.